I raise a number of country situations, countries that I've recently visited, the DRC among them, Colombia, United States, Kenya. I'm happy to take any questions relating to those situations, or of course to the report itself, which deals with the issue of vigilante killings. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you, Professor Alston. Yeah, we'll start here in the front.
Shahir from Talk Radio News Service. What was your analysis of the United States? I see here, just from a brief statement, if the government does not move to answer questions, I will increasingly be perceived as carrying out indiscriminate killings. What do you mean by that?
Well, the problem with the United States is that it is, as you know, making increasing use of drones and predators as a way in which to fight conflicts in which it's involved. And these are particularly prominently used right now in relation to Pakistan and Afghanistan. My concern is that these drones, these predators, are being operated in a framework which may well violate international humanitarian law and international human rights law. The onus is really on the government of the United States to reveal more about the ways in which it makes sure that arbitrary executions, extrajudicial executions, are not in fact being carried out through the use of these weapons. The response of the US is simply untenable, and that is that the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly, by definition, have no role in relation to killings that take place in relation to an armed conflict. That would remove the great majority of issues that come before these bodies right now. And I mentioned in my report that the whole issue, the whole set of issues arising in the Congo, a set of issues arising in the Goldstone report, in Kenya, in Sri Lanka, all of these concern areas in which armed conflicts are taking place. Not exclusively, but in part. And if the US position was serious, it would be standing up and saying, none of these issues should be talked about by the relevant UN bodies. That's not tenable. It's clear that we should be talking about them. And what we need then is for the US to be more upfront and to say, okay, we're prepared to discuss some aspects of this program. Otherwise, you have the really problematic bottom line, which is that the Central Intelligence Agency is running a program that is killing significant numbers of people, and there is absolutely no accountability in terms of the relevant international laws.
And so what you're asking for from the Obama administration, are there specifics that you're asking for that can be, you know, conducted or coordinated now, especially on the ground in Pakistan with the drones, and also looking over at Afghanistan with the increase in military might that the U.S. is equipping right now to send over that?
I've indicated, both in my statement earlier today and previously, that I would like to know the legal basis on which the U.S. is operating. In other words, it needs to indicate both in terms of domestic law, who's running the program, and what accountability mechanisms are in place in relation to that or those organizations. Secondly, what sort of precautions does the U.S. take to ensure that these weapons are used strictly for purposes that are consistent with international humanitarian law? And thirdly, what sort of review mechanism is there to actually evaluate what has happened when these weapons have been used? Those are the issues that I'd like to see addressed.
Thank you for that. So that's how you do.
Sure. I was going to ask you about the Congo, but I wanted to first ask you about Sri Lanka. I know that I mean, among other things, there's this widely distributed video appearing to depict the Sri Lankan army executing what may be LTT rebels or not. What was the result of your finding, and did you think that the government's own self-investigation of the video. They've also announced another investigation now of these more recent State Department and EU reports. What did you think of the government's own self-investigation?
Well, the government of Sri Lanka doesn't have a very proud track record in this area. We are aware of the Commission of Inquiry that was set up with considerable fanfare several years ago, again to look at a range of specified killings in which the government was accused by various groups. The government appointed an independent international group to advise on the way in which that commission should proceed. That group at a certain point resigned, saying the inquiry was not serious. There was just no possibility for them to continue to focus. And so what you've got then is a situation where the Sri Lankan government gave up on that inquiry. They just abandoned it completely. You've then got the videotape incident arising and the Sri Lankan government saying, well, we're going to appoint experts to give us advice. Now, as I've indicated clearly, two of those experts were from the military. And if you want to examine what the United States military is doing, you don't appoint General Smithers and General Bloggs in order to do an independent investigation. That's in effect what the Sri Lankans were putting forward, and of course those reports said no problem, this videotape couldn't possibly be genuine. There were two other experts, one who focused at length on one small part, and the question as to whether the video was taken by a mobile telephone or by a video camera. But nothing that he said convinced me that the video itself, however taken, was necessarily a fake. So that leaves us with the question, is there any reason to believe either that it's authentic or that it's a fake? I would have liked to see the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights undertaking some sort of independent investigation. I think it would have been in the interests of the UN human rights system for some conclusion to be found on that. In other words, either the video is a fake, in which case, congratulations, the government of Sri Lanka. They have not, their armed forces have not committed these offences and they should not be criticised for them. Or the video appears to reasonably be authentic and therefore there needs to be an investigation into it. Now, I have to say that I have begun to commission some analyses of that videotape because I think it's incumbent upon me, I think I owe it to the government of Sri Lanka to try to probe more deeply. In relation to the recent committee of inquiry that has been announced, I think that the track record shows very clearly that unless you've got some real independence there, the situation in Sri Lanka today is not one that is going to lend itself to an independent and impartial, let alone convincing analysis of the allegations that have been contained in both the US State Department and the European Union reports. So I don't hold out a great deal of hope until and unless we get an indication from the government that it's really prepared to move this to a whole different level of independence and objectivity.
Can I just add also just one, I mean, even whether videoed or not, there were reports that people seeking to surrender back in May with white flags were in fact shot. There was even some reports that they communicated to UN officials before they came out and then were shot. I mean, does it take a video? Did you look at, did you consider those? What do you think of those reports? And some say that even senior military officials of Sri Lanka kind of gave the go-ahead and said that surrender shouldn't be accepted.
There's a very simple way forward. The government of Sri Lanka has insisted that none of these events took place, that these people trying to surrender were not killed, or if so, it was completely accidental, that the many other people who were killed in the final few months of the conflict were not killed illegally in violation of international law. That's the government's position. Fine. Let's have an independent inquiry. Let individual investigators in, let them talk to the tens of thousands of people who were present at the time on the peninsula, who could provide eyewitness account to some of these things. Let's have a real investigation. Let's get the truth on the table. The government of Sri Lanka has not permitted any such access. And so until it reveals that it is prepared to subject itself to scrutiny, it's very hard to take its assurances that nothing happened at face value.